world thinks of hippies or the term hippie as flower children just sitting around, getting high, spreading love, and doing nothing. But that's a lie. The real countercultures wasn't about peace signs and rainbows, it was about survival, rebellion, and standing up against a system that wanted them gone. These weren't just stoners, they were outlaws, fighting for the same freedoms we fight for today. This is the truth about the hippie lie. In the 1960s and 70s, many young people rejected war, corporate greed, and government control. They experimented with alternative lifestyles, communal living, sustainable practices, and self-sufficiency. Many were broke, jobless, and labeled as criminals for their beliefs and their cannabis use. During the 1960s and 70s, major newspapers and media outlets often painted hippies as unserious, unkept, and perpetually high on drugs, rather than acknowledging their activism against the Vietnam War, environmental destruction, and systemic corruption. Some key ways they did this was mocking headlines and cartoons. Publications like Time, Life magazine, and the New York Times often ran articles that fixated on hippies' appearance, drug use, and free love, while ignoring their anti-war activism. Editorial cartoons frequently depicted them as lazy freeloaders who contributed nothing to society.
More and more lies. Does all this sound a little familiar? Media influence, corporate influence on our culture? Man, oh man.
Selective reporting was rampant. Media outlets often covered the aesthetic aspects of hippie culture, long hair, beads, tie-dye, psychedelic music, rather than the political causes they fought for, such as civil rights, corporate accountability, and ending imperialist wars. They framed protests as chaotic and violent, while the counterculture movement largely embraced nonviolent resistance. Media coverage often focused on the few violent clashes, reinforcing the idea that hippies were reckless troublemakers. The 1968 Democratic National Convention protests and Kent State Massacre were examples of this narrative being pushed. They always made the message drugs not dissent narrative, rather than acknowledging that hippies were questioning the capitalist and war-driven system. Mainstream media portrayed them as a bunch of stoners aimlessly lounging in parks and communes, distracting from their legitimate critiques of society. Several examples of media that pushed these stereotypes was Time magazine, April 7, 1967. The infamous cover story, The Hippies, Philosophy of the Subculture, largely dismissed the movement as drug-fueled escapism rather than a serious political force. Life magazine, May 1969. While the magazine ran some positive pieces on Woodstock and counterculture, it also frequently played into stereotypes, emphasizing drug use and portraying hippies as naive dreamers detached from reality. Local newspapers all the time. Many local and regional newspapers publish articles mocking hippies as bums, particularly in cities like San Francisco. TV and radio, news broadcasts and talk shows often brought on experts who claimed hippies were brainwashed, lazy, or communists rather than activists fighting against war and corporate exploitation. The truth is, hippies were deeply involved in environmental activism, the civil rights movement, feminist struggles, and anti-war efforts, but mainstream media largely downplayed this, preferring to focus on the stone dropout stereotype.
Real hippies hated that term. They knew what the media and government was doing, and they knew how they were shaping the word hippies to be something it wasn't. Real hippies considered themselves to be pioneers of justice and equality. Their labels were freaks and outcasts, not the term hippies that the media and government was trying to make it be, a bunch of flower children hugging trees. Let's not let this be what this label was shaped to be in the past. What it was really about was those things. Reclaim our culture.
People like Abby Hoffman, a prominent figure in counterculture and political activism of the 60s, co-founded the Hippies, an offshoot of the counterculture movement, rejecting mainstream values of the time. Ken Kesey, author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, became a key figure in counterculture after leading the Merry Pranksters, who traveled across America in a colorful bus, advocating for freedom, exploration, and experimentation with drugs. Timothy Leary, a psychologist and writer, Leary was an advocate for the use of psychedelics, especially LSD, as a way to expand consciousness. Though he became an iconic figure of the 60s counterculture, he was critical of mainstream definitions of hippies and the commercialization of the movement. Allen Ginsberg, a leading poet of the Beat generation. His work and activism laid the groundwork for the 60s counterculture. He was an outspoken critic of the establishment, rejecting the growing commercialized image of the hippie movement. Hunter S. Thompson, a journalist and author. Thompson was the creator of gonzo journalism and captured the essence of the rebellious spirit of the 60s and 70s. He was highly critical of both the establishment and the commercialization of counterculture movements, refusing to be pigeonholed as a hippie. Joan Baez, a folk singer and activist who was heavily involved in civil rights and anti-war movements. While she was associated with the counterculture, she rejected being labeled as a hippie because of the movement's growing association with the mainstream ideals. Charles Bukowski, a poet-novelist known for his raw, gritty portrayal of life, often in contrast to the idealism of hippie movement. Bukowski's work rejected the counterculture's romanticization of peace and love, instead focusing on the harsh realities of existence. Grace Slick, lead singer of Jefferson Airplane, she was one of the most influential musicians of the 60s. While associated with counterculture, she was often critical of the commercialization of the movement, preferring to focus on her art and anti-establishment views. All these people were true hippies, and they even rejected the term. Reclaim our culture, join my cause, and spread this message. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, stay lifted.